Welcome to Northwest Digital News. I'm Kevin Hunter with Chris Bornstead and Kyle Torgerson in studio. It is a beautiful Wednesday, May the 30th. We've just about got through the month of May here. And Kyle, give us a quick weather report, if you would.
Well, today is going to be a high of 69 with a low of 45. It looks like it's going to be mostly cloudy. If you look for the rest of the week, it's going to be mostly cloudy with showers on Monday. It seems like the highest day will be Saturday with a high of 73, and the lowest day will actually be, it seems about like Thursday, next Tuesday, next Wednesday, 46, 47.
So for those of you who thought the 80-degree weather that we had was a little on the high side, we got a little cool down coming for you.
I hope you enjoyed the weather while you could. I know I did.
Perfect. Well, we are going to be talking about the declining value of college and university degrees and visiting about some of the phenomena around why that's occurring. And we have a number of really great guests on here today who are joining us via phone. Before we get to those real quick, I just want to mention that this is actually a phenomena that started in 2010. There has been somewhere in the neighborhood of 3 to 5% declining enrollment in college universities all around the country. And there's been a number of different reasons why this has been occurring. But this is the 8th straight year that we've seen a drop in enrollment on college universities. And there have been now for a number of years. In fact, before we started seeing this actual decline in enrollment happening in 2010, in 2008, the Wall Street Journal wrote an article talking about why your college degree has less value in today's workforce than it did in the past. And this was an article they wrote in 2008. So interestingly enough, this trend of decline in enrollment and decline in value as perceived by employers has been something that was actually seen before it started to happen. So one of the our first guest is going to join us here today on our broadcast with Northwest Digital News, a longtime friend, professional colleague, has joined me many times on the Business Forum show. Great educator in the business sector, but one of the finest legal minds, in my opinion, in the legal aspects.
Don't they call this guy the super attorney or
yes,
something like that?
Mr. Jeff O'Brien is on the line with us here on Northwest Digital News. Thanks, Jeff, as always, for joining us here and contributing to our show.
Well, thank you for inviting me. And just to correct the record, it's not super attorney. The radio persona, the alter ego here, they refer to me as the lawyer extraordinaire for some reason. So I'm on the super lawyers list, but this goofy moniker called lawyer extraordinaire. So we'll leave it at that.
Lawyer extraordinaire.
Okay, that sounds much better.
Yeah, yeah, that sounds
like that.
Lawyer extraordinaire sounds much better.
You gotta stay true to the brand, right? If you're gonna brand you as that, you gotta use it consistently, right?
That's correct. So, Jeff, part of the reason that I wanted to have you on and talk about this a little bit is that people are aware that this situation has been going on with decline in college and university values. And by the way, if you have us on speakerphone or whatever, if you mind switching that off, your audio may come through a little cleaner here on this end. I just got a heads up from Kyle on that. The reason I wanted to have you give some feedback is you come from a profession that a university degree, a college degree will always be required. I'm hearing a ringtone here from... Yeah, there's a incoming line on that. Sorry about that. Jeff, you still there?
Yeah, I am.
Okay. Sorry, there was a incoming call that was on the line that we couldn't get canceled. Anyway, so the reason I wanted to have you come on the line is because you come from an area, doctors, lawyers, accountants. I mean, there's always going to be the situation where given professions are required to have a degree and the proper educational background. So first of all, one of the things that I wanted you to touch on was, are you seeing from a legal aspect, are you seeing any of this flip-flop of importance where years ago the priority was put on education first and the degree that you had, employers would publish, looking for a master's in X type of background, and then they would list the experience and say that that was preferred. So it wasn't necessarily required, but preferred. And now that seems to have flipped in the business world in general. I'm curious what you're seeing from a legal perspective, being somebody who's currently practicing in the field of law.
Well, Kevin, I don't necessarily, I don't know how much extent that where you went to law school matters in terms of, if you're talking about a law firm hiring somebody. I mean, certainly, certain law schools are afforded certain weight, but, I think it depends on what the position you're hiring for. So in my case here at our firm, we hire a lateral partner. Like when I joined this firm a year ago, they didn't care what law school I went to. They cared what my book of business was. So it's an economic consideration in terms of what are you bringing economically to the partnership, and whether or not they want to affiliate with you. So it doesn't really, your education in that regard doesn't really factor in. I mean, historically, I'm sure there were firms out there, and there might still be some, that have a preference towards a certain law school graduate because the founders were of that law school. I don't know, but I've never come across that. When it comes to hiring associates, it's, again, less important what school they went to or where they were, got their law degree from, and more about, their experience, how many years of practice, and the areas they've been practicing in. So, I always tell folks that, law school helps you with your critical thinking skills, issue spotting, and things like that. But I see it more as a prerequisite for sitting for the bar exams to be able to get your license to practice law.
Interesting. So the other aspect that I wanted you to kind of touch on a little bit, because you're known as the Minnesota craft beverage lawyer. You also have a number of professional athletes from a various number of sports that you represent, and you deal with a very interesting blend of clientele. I'm curious, from you being in the lawyer's chair, what are you hearing from some of those clients out there that are hiring employees and whatnot into their areas? What are you hearing from them in terms of their estimation of the importance of degrees, and are you also seeing a shift towards more emphasis on actual work experience?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, if you talk about a brewery hiring hiring a head brewer or an assistant brewer, they care about what their experience is in the brewing industry, not about, whether or not they went through, because there are some technical programs out there for brewers, whether or not they went through one program or another, or you studied at that school. No, they don't really do that. They look at where you've been and what your work credentials are. So again, I'm not seeing as much of the emphasis on which degree do you have. I mean, I think that we're in an era where, I think a long time ago, I think it mattered more that you had a certain degree. Okay. I can remember, like my father has an engineering degree from the University of Minnesota. I can remember when he went through a career transition, because he had experienced so many years in a field away from his degree. Now, this is probably 20 years ago. That was a bigger deal then, when we went to look for something else, the degree and the experience didn't match up. Today, I don't think that we're so wedded to that concept.
I can remember, growing up in high school, where they told us to focus on getting a good education, getting a good job so that you have health insurance and all that stuff like that. Go to college, get a good degree, and it doesn't seem like that is working anymore.
Yeah, so there's in your state, Jeffrey, right now, there's obviously we're in the swing of the political season, and there's actually been conversation in the governor's races over there with some of the shift in focus in college and education. If you would elaborate on that a little bit.
Sure. So our former two-term governor, Tim Pawlenty, is running. Is attempting a political comeback of sorts, and after he decided not to run 8 years ago, has decided he'd like the job again. And so he's thrown his hat into the ring to run for governor to get his old job back. And one of the issues that he's been stressing has been doing more to emphasize and promote two-year degrees, the technical college or vocational training, and as part of his reason for doing that is those are where the industries that would require the two-year degree or benefit from the two-year degree are where the jobs are right now. So there's so much focus. Everybody has this, holds out this, you have to go to get a four-year college degree, but a lot of folks have stopped and said, well, why do you need to get a four-year college degree? I mean, I know of stories of guys going into, for a two-year program to get their welding certificate and coming out and making like 80 or 100 grand. I mean, why go far into debt in a four-year college when you could come out in 2 years at a much lower tuition rate and come out making that kind of money? It just doesn't make any sense.
My son is currently at Perry Tech, which is a technical college in Yakima, Washington, and he's going for welding, and his program is only 1 year long, and he will be making that amount of money when he finds a job. 83% of the kids that graduate from Perry Tech graduate with a job. The other kids that don't is because they didn't want a job, is what they're telling them. So what you're saying is absolutely true. These guys are going to school for 1 or 2 years, coming out and making a whole bunch of money doing labor work.
Right. And, I think our society sometimes puts a stigma on that work. I'm like, I don't care, stigma. 80 grand is 80 grand, and if it's something you're good at, why force a square peg into a round hole and go pursue some four-year liberal arts degree, particularly when we see some of the sentiments and the behavior on these college campuses, particularly from the faculty, that, you have to question whether or not four-year colleges are training their students to actually, function in the real world.
Exactly. So I have one last thing, Jeff, and then we're going to move on to another guest here. But I have one last thing that I just wanted to be curious if you wanted to comment on. If you prefer not to, that's okay as well. One of the conversations that has been going on with regard to why the four-year degree is losing its luster is that there's been a fair bit of conversation around the fact that more educators are pushing a political agenda, and that administrators in colleges and universities are shifting more and more towards this, for lack of a better description, a progressive leftist type agenda. And so the word indoctrination is being used a lot with regard to colleges and universities. And Yale University didn't do themselves any favors on Sunday when they featured Hillary Clinton as their keynote speaker. And I echoed a sentiment that came from mainstream media where one of the commentators said it was like this was one final scoop of nonsense before they hit the road. And so I'm curious, do you have any sense of that? And is that something that you're seeing and hearing as well? Is there in fact a element of indoctrination that's happening on the universities, in your opinion, that's maybe hurting this emphasis that was on college degrees years ago?
I do. I mean, I'm of the opinion, when you see emphasis on, we want to get more of this, and it's usually for one side of the political spectrum. This emphasis, we want to get everybody a four-year degree. Let's free college for everyone. Remember that was, I think, Bernie Sanders proposed that one. Right. And then there was talk about the price tag of that. But then on the other end, it's let's give free pre-K, preschool. And you're starting to look and see, well, what get them from about 3 until they're about 22, fill their head with a bunch of bunk, and then you get them out and they're just the mind-numbed robot voter that you want for your party. And I think that's a problem. I think it's a real problem. And I think that some of this stuff, the college professors that have tenure, that can in some of these ridiculous classes that they teach these days. It's just getting out of hand, and I think that's part of what's driving this movement to turn away from the four-year degree, other than if you have to get it for someone like my profession, where you have to get a four-year degree because it's a prerequisite to going to law school or something, or graduate school or something else, medical school. You'll sit through it, but for a lot of folks, this is why I think the focus is turning to 2-year degrees or other avenues in terms of experience, because nobody wants to get their head filled with a bunch of worthless BS for 4 years and pay that much money for it.
Well said, and you never disappoint, Jeff. I always appreciate.
Call it like I see it.
Yes, absolutely. So thanks for joining us here on Northwest Digital News. Always a pleasure, and we look forward to visiting with you with other issues here on the show as well. Thanks, Jeff.
Sounds good. Thanks, Kevin.
Okay, go ahead and click off of that show. So we have another guest who's going to be joining us here shortly. Gentleman's name is Denny Chuba. Denny is the CEO of Chuba Co. And Kyle will put the website here up on the screen as soon as we make a contact here with Denny. Here's a really interesting thing about Chuba Co. If you guys heard of the television show called Bath Crashers,
I have.
Yeah, this is basically kind of coming in and doing a total remake of bathrooms in people's homes. And
While we have these guys on the line, they could totally redo my bathroom for my mom, like
they could,
handicap style.
Yeah.
We could do a whole episode about it.
Okay, so we got Denny's voicemail there. We'll try and make a connection with him as well here. Let's move on to adding. Go ahead and click it off.
I mean, honestly, if they want to make my bathroom look like that, I mean, that would be okay with me. And,
Excellent. So we'll come back to Denny Chuba here in just a moment. Meanwhile, Jim Walsh is on the road today, our representative from the 19th District. And Jim actually shared a post that we put up the other day on talking about this phenomena. And Jim has agreed to join us here as well. And so we will add Jim here to the show. And then I also have a text message from one of our county commissioners, Arn Mortensen, who's hired a ton of executives over the years. And so we'll bring Arn on here in just a moment as well.
He's going to call in?
Yeah, we'll call him. Okay, so let's get Jim Walsh on the line here with us.
James Walsh.
James Walsh, yes.
Oh, yeah. We will need a number for Arn Mortensen.
Hello, Jim. Kevin Hunter here on Northwest Digital News. How are you?
How you guys doing?
We're doing fantastic. So Kyle, Chris, and Kevin here on the line with you on this end, and we're having a conversation here on Northwest Digital News about the declining value of college and university degrees. And we had a post that we put up on Northwest Digital News on Monday that touched on some of this phenomena. And you shared this on your site. Obviously, you see some of the point of which we're making there. I'm kind of curious from a, not necessarily a legislative standpoint, but being involved in politics in the state, somebody who gets around and visits with a lot of different people from around the state of Washington. Are you seeing something similar to this? Because an article that I actually have in front of my face here on the broadcast desk is an article published in 2008 by the Wall Street Journal, and the title of the article is "The Declining Value of Your College Degree." And this was actually 2 years prior to 2010, so enrollments were still increasing for 2 years beyond when this article was published. But now for 8 years in a row, we've seen steady decline in enrollment on college universities. I'm curious what your thoughts on all of this are.
Oh, it's a great question and a great issue. Let me talk first as a parent, even before I talk as anything else.
Sure.
My middle daughter just graduated from college last week, about 10 days ago. And she went to a very good private college, and it was a significant investment on our family's part. And through that process, we watched what she dealt with at that school for 4 years, and it really does. Any kid who's motivated and self-determined, self-driven, can find good value in higher ed. There's no question of that.
Sure.
The question is, what does higher ed offer? I mean, a determined young person can find value in education at any level. But does the institution offer good value to every kid who comes through? inevitably you're talking about the kid who's not quite so driven, not quite so determined, is kind of has an open mind, is a good kid, but is looking for kind of that motivation, that aha moment, that click that gives them the vision of what they want to do with their lives. And it's there that I think that our institutions of higher ed are failing. They're so caught up in their own orthodoxies and philosophies and pushing their agendas that they don't think of their customers, who are their students.
Exactly.
The administrators I'm talking about, some of the staff and faculty, they don't think about their students as the real beneficiary of the institution. They think of themselves as the beneficiaries. And that's where you get into a lot of trouble. Now, moving on to the question of what we see here in Washington, I think it's a little better, frankly, than in other parts of the country. I think our state institutions, our four-year institutions of higher ed, have always been a little more practical-minded than some of the others around the country. Of course, we've got the Evergreen State College, and they're kind of our outlier. But when you talk about the other 4 years, the University of Washington and Washington State and the directional colleges, Western, Central, and Eastern, they all do a pretty good job of keeping kids grounded, I think, and keeping their focus on practical education. So I think we're a little better in the state of Washington and at the four-year level, and we're in good shape, I think, at the 2-year level of colleges, which in this state are very market responsive and very driven by providing practical education to their students. So when I go around the state, talk to people and talk to students and talk to college administrators, I'm generally hopeful. I think that in the state of Washington, we do a pretty good job of structuring higher ed to make it practical and useful and give the students that vision of a path to a good future.
I'd like to get some feedback from you on a comment that came from a guest we had on just before you. Jeffrey O'Brien is a attorney out of the Minneapolis-St. Paul area and represents guests from all different walks of life, business folks from all different walks of life. And he was visiting a little bit about the governor's race that's actually going on in the state of Minnesota right now, and mentioned that one of the gubernatorial candidates, Tim Pawlenty, is talking about the reality in the state of where more and more students are pushing towards 2-year degrees, technical degrees, vocational type situations, and that becoming a much greater focus of educational interest for students beyond high school. Your thoughts on that?
Well, it's been brewing for a long time. I mean, the recently traditional path, the 4-year bachelor's degree path, the cost of that, as most of your viewers well know, has been outpacing inflation and other economic metrics for a couple of decades. So in real terms, the cost of that 4-year degree has been going up sharply, and people are in the end rational actors, and at some point you begin to ask if this certification is getting so much more expensive than everything else in life. I'm going to start taking a harder look at what it really provides, and I think and this is not particularly new, but what it has reached an inflection point, I think, kind of in the time frame you're talking about, maybe the last 6 or 8 years. It's gotten to the point where reasonable people are saying it's just not worth the time and the money, especially since so much of that increasing cost has been driven by loans, by borrowing on the part of the student. The student reasonably begins to ask, is this worth all that debt that I would take on to achieve this degree? In a few years, in 4 years or maybe 5, is it worth it? And the 2-year path, which almost always involves less spending, less outpoured money on the student's part or the family's part, is better bang for the buck. You know, it gets the student to a place where he or she can earn a good living faster and for a smaller cost. And that you know, people are reasonable. At the end of the day, they're going to calculate this, and it's not a surprise that in the last couple of years, after we hit that inflection point of cost, you're seeing people rethinking their commitment to four-year higher ed.
Yeah, so a final point that I'd like to have you touch on, part of the reason that we decided to have this as a subject on the show here today is one of the concerns is that there's a element of indoctrination, for lack of a better description, and we're seeing more and more of a push. This also came from our first guest that we talked to as well. More and more of a push from across the country where more of the educators in higher learning are, you know, have a leaning towards left politics, and we're seeing more administrators pushing a progressive leftist type agenda that you're seeing on the college university.
I have several friends that go to our local community college, and even just at the local community college level, my friends are concerned because they are conservative.
Mm-hmm.
They're afraid that they will write, say, or do the wrong thing and actually get a worse grade because the teacher doesn't agree with them politically than what it is on the merits. So this is a true concern. I mean, I have friends right now that will not engage their professors because they are afraid. They are afraid that they will get backlash.
Yeah, I actually, to that point, Jim, I actually had a student from the local college who mentioned to me that they were working on a report, and they were told by the instructor what they wanted the outcome of the report to be, even though the reason why I even had the interaction is that the student contacted me asking me for feedback on a particular social issue, and I shared what I saw as the reality side of that particular issue, and the student said, but that's not what they want us to say in the report, that my report has to state something else. So that kind of ties into Chris's point there. So I'm curious if you think, in part, the decline of value of college degrees by employers, by business people, is it in part due to this element of indoctrination? Are you seeing or hearing things that lend to validate that point?
Well, sure it is. Sure it is. And it's no secret that about 30 years ago, approximately, maybe a little more than that now, when a lot of, I don't know how you say, I mean, hardcore leftists had their breach with mainstream politics, and not just here in the States, but even in Western Europe, and they split off from mainstream political engagement. They made a strategic choice, many of these groups, to basically work higher education. They moved their activity, their focus, from the political system to the educational system. And this sort of happened after that famous summer of '68, things like that, when a lot of conventional political engagement on the part of the left ended badly. They moved to the colleges and the universities. So this is not a surprise. And I mean, Chris, I would say to your friends, there's when I went through higher ed, I sort of felt the same way. I was more conservative, and I had to learn to sort of keep my head down sometimes and pick a few fights where I could make some good headway, but not always speak my mind completely. You know, Chris, I think that experience kind of makes those of us who are more conservative stronger, in fact. It teaches us how to survive and how to engage people of the other side of the aisle and the spectrum in a way that people of the left never learn. They never have to deal with that.
Right. Yeah.
And so I guess you could say I'm making lemonade out of lemons on this front, but
yes.
But I think some of those skills you learn in doing that are useful skills in life. Not that one should ever have to hide his or her beliefs, but learning how to nuance it, learning how to engage those who feel very strongly the opposite way. That's a life skill. But yes, to the point, Kevin, more to your point, I think you're right. I think that the politicization of higher ed has eroded the objective value of the higher education degrees. And the higher up the higher ed scale you go, the more true it is. I would say that the 2-year degrees are by and large not terribly political, and often of a more technical nature, more easily valued and valuable. I think the 4-year degree, you start to get into some sort of more questionable area there, some questions about the true value. It depends, of course, on what the focus of your studies was and what the major was. But and then the higher up you go, the worse still it gets. I mean, I think some advanced degrees have become so politicized as to be damn near worthless. And you see some people who get higher ed degrees. I'm talking here master's degree and PhDs, especially in the softer sciences and the humanities, who end up virtually unemployable after they get those very expensive, very difficult to achieve higher ed degrees. They often ruefully find out that academia is shrinking, and outside of academia, those higher degrees are not worth that much. In fact, I know a couple of holders of academic doctorates who leave it off their resumes when they apply for jobs, because they've found that these sort of soft study PhDs are actually a drawback on a resume.
To that point, I had a member of the family, which I won't name, but I've had some very comical conversations with him. He actually has 3 degrees. And the first degree was a degree in sociology, and he couldn't get work, so he went back and got another degree in philosophy. And I told him, I says, well, now great, now you can philosophize as to why you can't get a degree in sociology or you can't get a job in sociology. But yeah, it was the heaping on of these types of things that, and I can tell you right now that his work currently has nothing to do with either of the 2 degrees. And this is kind of to a point earlier this morning. I got a call from a college student out of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and she was sharing her degree focus right now in school. But what she wanted to share was that she's roughly right around 22 years old, wanted to share that at least half of her classmates that she graduated school from have not gone on to a university environment. They found other ways to move on in whatnot in life. And so she goes, that's a pretty significant chunk of them. And then of those people that she knows, that she has regular contact with, who are now either completed with college or close to being done as she is, she goes, I can't tell you how many people I know who are working in fields that have nothing to do with their college education. And so that coming from somebody who has just recently experienced that, it was just really quite interesting. As always,
well, you know, and if you go way back, of course, Kevin, that's the way it was. I mean, college 100 years ago didn't translate directly into the line of work someone might do. People pursued college, those who did, and there were a lot fewer in those days, did it for basically pleasure. I mean, they did it for their own enjoyment, and there's a lot to be said for that. I mean, I don't want to sound like we're knocking a philosophy degree. It's interesting stuff. It's great stuff to study.
Absolutely.
But you should pursue that kind of end for its own purposes. I mean, you're not imagine that a degree in philosophy is going to immediately open doors to work for you. And if you want to find work, maybe focus on something else earlier in your life and pursue your pleasure of a degree in philosophy maybe a little later in your life. There's nothing wrong with studying that stuff at all. It's great stuff. I mean, but it is not a practical end, and nor should it be really. It should be something someone does because they love to do it. And
I agree 100%, and that's really what our focus point here is all about. And even talking about the declining values of college degrees is really taking and applying that, being able to apply that degree, whatever it is, or that piece of education, being able to apply that in a practical way in business. That is what is then perceived as value on the end of the person who's going to write a paycheck and employ you. is really how practical is the education and experience that you're bringing to the table. As always, Jim, a pleasure having you here on Northwest Digital News. We have a couple of other guests that we're going to bring on the show as well who are standing by, so we'll let you go for now, but appreciate you joining us, and glad to have you back again with us in the future. Thank you.
It's always great to talk to you guys, Kevin, Chris, all you guys. I'll look forward to seeing you in person soon.
All right, take care.
See you later.
All right, so that was Jim Walsh, our state representative from the 19th District. Another person in politics here locally. Arn Mortensen is a commissioner in Cowlitz County. The reason that I wanted to have conversation with Arn, go ahead and bring him on. The reason I wanted to have conversation with Arn is that in Arn's back experience, prior to being county commissioner, obviously right now he's in a position where a lot of departments and a lot of people report to him. But isn't in his experience prior to this, Arn is a high level executive who has hired people from all different walks of life and recruited into executive level positions. And so Arn will be joining us here. Hello, Arn, you there?
Yeah, if you can hold off a second, I'll make it out of the men's room.
Okay. Okay.
Important business being done.
You're on the air, Arn. So.
Oh yeah, no, I suspected that, but nevertheless, that's the real world.
That's the real world. So on the line,
and we
with
are
us,
talking about the real world, are we not?
Yes, we are talking about the real world. And the subject of today's show is the declining value of college and university degrees. And as I was just saying here before we got you on the line, is that many employers are seeing a flip-flop of, instead of advertising for somebody with a MBA in business and having said experience as being preferred, you're seeing this phenomena of it rolling over to where somebody's saying we're looking for X experience, and if they have college as well, they may say college preferred or some college preferred or a given degree preferred, but you're seeing a reversal of that role. And with even business coaches that I have chatted with around the country, you're seeing more and more of them saying, we want to know what your experience is. We want to know what you can be trained to do. We want to know what attitude you're bringing to the table. You know, are you a team player? Are you somebody who can fit in our group? And if you got educational experience, what is it? It's kind of have fallen in that order instead of the degree being the number one or most significant hiring criteria. And so as an individual who's hired a lot of executives into corporate America, if you would hear, I'd like you to just share a little bit of your experiences that you've seen maybe in years past and what you think might be lending to the decline of the value of a college and university degree.
Okay, how much time do I have? Because I'm going to need about 4 hours.
How about 4 minutes?
4 minutes. I'm on both sides of that coin, but primarily I will support the concept that when I interviewed any number of people, the thing I looked for was attitude. And I can exemplify that by telling you about a particular interview where a guy was interviewing for a quality assurance job. Mm-hmm. And this is in engineering, and he was waxing philosophically about how happy he was that he was able to shut down the production line because he actually found the problem. And to me, that was just a bad attitude of a different kind than you were probably addressing. That's an attitude where he didn't understand his job was not to shut down the assembly line, but to prevent the assembly line by being shut down. So if he had explained that to me and said, lamentably, I had no choice, it would have been a different response on my particular part there. Attitude makes all the difference in the world. And that isn't always evident, unfortunately, but it's also not necessarily applicable to all kinds of jobs. So what I'm going to tell you is that hiring should be an individual exercise. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, we've reduced that to a check-the-box exercise. And in part, I understand that because with the internet, people put their applications on there, and they get responses from where they used to get 15 people maybe responding. Now they get 10 times or 100 times that. And so people have learned to game all the check boxes just to get in through the door. Mm-hmm. All right, I'll stop there so you can ask me the next question.
Yeah, so really the point of all of this, and part of where this conversation got started from, is that there's been a concern that part of the reason the decline has been experienced, and this is a phenomena that has happened since 2010, last 8 years in a row, a steady decline of enrollment on colleges and universities, and we're speaking mostly here about four-year degrees. One of the concerns has been is that the university environment has pushed towards more of a political indoctrination than it is about giving people real nuts and bolts that they can apply in the real world. Do you see and hear that phenomena as well? And do you think that's perhaps one of the contributors as to why employers are putting more emphasis on what somebody's actual experience is today than perhaps what degree they may or may not have?
Let me answer that in a simplistic way. The employer a priori doesn't really care whether we can impugn the educational system or not. So they're just finding candidates with degrees that are just not capable of inspiring confidence or inspiring an attitude. Mm-hmm. So an employee or a prospective employee, a candidate, can overcome that with overwhelming knowledge in some of the applicable fields that are hard to find. So, for example, engineering is still a scarce entity. Engineers are a scarce entity, so a lot will be tolerated. But we're putting out a large number of people with degrees that aren't directly useful for most employers. And that in itself has another side of the coin, and that side is that a new graduate that, now I'm going to step over myself because I think college itself has been misused a number of ways. The current misuse is that people coming out really do not have an education. They don't have an attitude of wanting to contribute. They have an attitude of demanding, and that doesn't work for an employer. An employer will hire somebody only if they can make money off of them. Otherwise, there's no point in hiring an employee. But most college grads don't seem to understand that. So while they should get a decent education, and that involves being exposed to all kinds of things, the colleges now have become largely a politically correct system. In the end, political correctness doesn't allow you to build a computer or harvest a field. So who wants to hire them? They haven't learned anything. They haven't learned to think. They've only learned to respond or to demand.
Mm-hmm. Chris?
Well, I see the future of education changing away from classroom style stuff. I mean, we have laptops and portable devices that we can take anywhere that we want to. Mm-hmm. I mean, I can go on the job and we may have to do something that we don't know how to do. I can grab my phone, go to YouTube and watch a video on how to do that step by step. Mm-hmm. So maybe the focus is maybe not so much school anymore in that. I like these tech schools, these trade schools, where you go in for, a year or two and you actually learn how to do something instead of just listening and going through the work that they want you to do.
To Chris's point, Arn, I've been aware that there have been conversations around the country because we're in the middle of midterm elections and it's political season everywhere around the country. I've been aware of the fact that there have been conversations going on right now in many of the state level elections with politicians themselves talking about the importance of, or the shift rather, away from four-year degrees to a lot more two-year degrees, to a lot more tech school degrees, vocational type situation. So that's actually an ongoing conversation. And the guest we had on in the beginning of the show, Jeff O'Brien, is an attorney out of Minnesota, and he said that's an actual conversation right now that's going on in the governor's race as well.
Yeah, that actually has been a conversation that was going on for quite a while. When I was at Qualcomm, I interviewed probably about 1,000 people, I would guess, and I could see that trend then over the years. That is both interesting, but there's a downside. We have tried to turn college into vocational schools. Mm-hmm. We can argue about whether whether an MBA degree. Well, let's stay in the undergraduate course. We can argue about the disciplines, but nevertheless, we have turned that. Even the engineering ones at the time were beginning to turn into what I call vocational. Let me try and give you an example. Where I went to Harvey Mudd, engineers got an engineering degree. When you go to Cal Berkeley, you would get a specific engineering degree. You were either a software engineer, a hardware engineer, RF engineer, civil engineer, yakety yak. The problem there is that these people are less capable as problem solvers because to them a hammer means everything has to be a nail. And we have lost that kind of edge where people learn fundamentals across the board. We've compounded that now with, let me say, the focus. We've seen that is causing the problem that's causing the discussion we have here today. Lots of people out there without ability to earn a living. But we're switching to vocation. Now to vocational schools. You have to stop and think, most vocations that are of the kind where you can mundanely become expert at them, they tend to be replaced by machines. So I'm thinking about going to school to become a truck driver. It may last 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, but you can see the handwriting on the wall. And I think that applies to a lot of the schools. So what we've done is we've prevented the exploration of fundamentals at the K through 12. We've done a horrible job there. And then in the universities, we have done what you called indoctrination. And they come out and they're not useful either for a vocation or for development or understanding of future opportunities that mankind has. So I claim college should be used still as an exploration time for kids to be asked to go through fundamental classwork, fundamental classes, chemistry, physics, biology, math, English, and social sciences. But we don't support that anymore. People can get degrees without any fundamental understanding of the world. Hence, we have a problem.
Underwater basket weaving.
Very good. Well, we have another guest on standby, Arn, so we're going to leave it there, but I appreciate your comments and your feedback onto the show. You bring a lot of value to the table, really, in any discussion, and we look forward to having you on other Northwest Israel News shows in the future. But thanks as always, Arn, for joining us here on a NDN broadcast.
My pleasure, Kevin and Chris. Have a great day.
You too. Thank you.
All right, so that was Arn Mortensen, County Commissioner from Cowlitz County. We now have Denny Chuba, who is waiting for our call here out of studio.
As I get him up, I kind of have a story actually to tell.
Sure.
One of my friends actually took a computer science class, and now she's actually switched her major in her second year. But her coworker, she works at Dairy Queen, has a master's in psychology, and he's a manager at Dairy Queen, so he has a master's.
Big money.
I'm guessing
he'll pay back that school loan in like 30 years.
Great difference for him at Dairy Queen.
He's probably still in the negatives due to all the loans he probably took out.
So I'm saying 30 years he's going to be paying that back.
Yeah.
Well, when we were having conversation about the degree with Yale, it was actually Yale just had their commencement exercises on Sunday. And Hillary Clinton was their keynote speaker, and it was just like, Hello, Denny, Kevin Hunter, Chris Bornstead, and Kyle Torgeson here on Northwest Digital News. A pleasure to have you on the broadcast with us today.
Hi, guys.
Hello.
So a little bit for our audience, and we have mentioned this a bit earlier, but I'll redo this. Denny, who's on the line with us today, is the founder of Chubaco, located just north of the Minneapolis-St. Paul area in the great state of Minnesota. Chubaco also has some interesting connections. Chubaco was the contractor on, was it 5 different episodes of Bath Crashers, Denny?
Yes, I believe so.
Yes. And so one of the featured contractors involved in that, I have a little bit of familiarity with what goes on with some of these things. So I have to believe that was not only interesting, exciting, but a bit of a headache for you too.
All of the above.
All of the above. So, Denny, part of the reason I wanted to have you on is, first of all, you and I have known each other a long, long time. I've also had you involved in various shows that we did with Minnesota School of Business, Globe University, some of the partnerships that we had going on there, and helping folks like you come in and mentor graduates leaving the business programs and kind of helping them get their feet on the ground with real world. And this really touches to the subject that we're talking about today. And that is that since 2010, there's been a steadily decreasing enrollment in colleges and universities around the United States. And there's all this conversation about that the actual value of what difference it makes in pay grade for people out in the real workforce, that's becoming less and less an impact as to what degree somebody has. As somebody who runs a large corporation, I know you're a lot more hands-off today than you were years ago. But in terms of hiring executives and even mid-level managers and stuff into your business, what's really important to you? Is it degree? Is it background and experience? Is it attitude? Kind of what order do you put those things in?
Well, obviously, some experience in the field and knowledge of what you're doing would be what we're looking for. It's kind of hard to determine, really, with a 1 or 2 time meeting. But as far as our educational system, it's been a long time since I've been through the college scene, but I think one of the things that I'd like to see colleges do is have a 15-credit course and work. Mm-hmm. Surprisingly, you have to show up, you have to have a good attitude, and you have to know what you're doing. Some of that's only by experience, but in our construction company, the Chubaco you referenced, we have tradesmen and semi-professionals in electrical, plumbing, this type of thing. They're not dummies, and we found that the people with a good work ethic are, generally speaking, have been taught by their families either on the farm or somewhere else by their parents. They don't necessarily get it in a college, and I'm not sure that's taught at all nowadays.
I think you hit the nail on the head. It's a really big missing factor in where society has gone today, because you see less and less of that on the farm or learning, from. I think about even my own background. I mean, part of the reason of what, even what cultivated the interest and even the skills that I had in construction later on is at the age of 12, I was helping a longtime family friend remodel the upstairs in a home that we bought. And then when I was 15 years old, I was in Minnesota by that time. When I was 15 years old, a journeyman carpenter out of the state of Maine wanted to build one of the first wood basements done in. So if you remember back, I don't know in your experiences when you might remember when the first wood basements were going in the Midwest, but this would have been 1981, 1982, somewhere in that neighborhood. And so I ran into a journeyman carpenter who wanted to build a house for himself. He was getting later in years, so the carrying of lumber and all the labor was just a bit much for him to do, and I offered to help him do it. And so I got a chance to clear the lot, excavate the lot, build a wood basement, frame a house from ground all the way to the top when I was 15, 16 years old. And so it just, and later, of course, then I went to a vocational school during high school, which also got some welding experiences there, some auto body and painting experiences there, kind of some construction experiences there. And I graduated high school with skill sets that I could actually use in a lot of different ways.
Right. Funny you should mention that, because our company put in half a dozen wood foundations many years ago when they weren't really accepted, or people even knew what they were. It was a big deal in Canada, but not so much here. But I myself started working with my father when I was 14 years old on a construction site, sweeping floors, nailing on shakes on the exterior, and simple things that I could do. So that's part of the thing. You don't have to come from a farm, but your family or your mentors or someone has to either get you working, mowing grass, shoveling snow, doing whatever it is that is work. Work is not always fun. It can be, but it is rewarding in itself, I find, if it's done properly, and you have pride in what you do after you accomplish something.
Denny, we're just about out of time, but I got one other point that I want to have you comment on, and that is the discussion that we're hearing around the country around the word indoctrination. And they're saying that more and more of the colleges and universities are becoming guilty of this, that the longtime staff on the college universities have this a significant leaning towards left type policies and agendas, that the administrators are pushing a progressive leftist type agenda on their students, and the expectations that the colleges and universities are that way. And an element that kind of just brought this all front and center was on Sunday, Yale University, after students have spent close to $200,000 in tuition for a four-year degree, were treated to a commencement speaker by the name of Hillary Clinton. And this got some really interesting coverage around the U.S., and many commentators were saying that this is essentially was another scoop of nonsense added to 4 years of indoctrination. And clearly the universities don't recognize how big a problem this has become. Are you seeing or hearing evidence of that? Are you familiar with this story at all, Denny?
Not that much. I'm not that close to the universities, but from what I hear, I mean, you have safe areas where people can go if their PC is violated. Politically correct verbiage, I guess, offends them. I can't believe that. I mean, you got to toughen up. This is a real world.
You'll never make it on a job site.
No, not. And well, my wife and I own a memory care building too that we opened 7 months ago, and you got to have a sense of humor to do that too, plus dedication. But I don't know about the colleges now. They seem not to be. They have free speech for the ones that agree with them, but not anyone else. So that's troubling in itself. I think the whole educational system may have to be reformed. I wouldn't know how to do it, but there's got to be a better way than what we're doing. Even the Khan Academy is breaking new ground.
Exactly. Well, Denny, always a pleasure to visit with you. You've been a very willing sport with a lot of different things that I've done over the years, and I can tell you even the feedback from students that came out of Minnesota School of Business and others, where you had some interaction there, and I think you even participated in the advisory capacity, because Minnesota School of Business has recruited a lot of different people into these advisory boards, and I think during one of the years, didn't you also join me at the college there, just to kind of give students some feedback or answer some questions as they were entering the workforce? I think you were part of that too, weren't you?
Yes, we did. Yes.
Well, like I said, a class guy, Denny, you always have been. appreciate the feedback and love to hear from somebody who's been a long timer in business. So,
Well, yeah, thanks for your time. Hoping we can make some changes.
that's right. All right, Kevin Hunter, Chris Bornstead, and Kyle Torgeson here on Northwest Digital News. We've had a lot of interesting guests here on the show today, and thanks for everyone who participated in the broadcast. I'm curious from your guys' perspective, what are some aha moments that came up, or maybe some reinforcements of things you might have known?
You know, one of the things that I grabbed right away was that several of our guests said attitude was important. I mean, when you asked, you know, what they look for, attitude was like the second or first thing out of Aaron's mouth, second or third thing out of his mouth.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, that I find that very, very that they would even look at their attitude. You would think that they would want their qualifications, their skills, and stuff like that. No, they're looking how they respond and react and speak back to them. And I find that very interesting because I found that interesting.
Yeah.
Now, you may be listening, you're like, oh no, America's doomed. The kids are not getting, you know, the stuff they need. They're not getting, you know, expertise and things like that. Well, the place that I graduated from, Kelsall High School, starting as 8th graders, if you were advanced in math, you could actually go over to the high school and do geometry and construction. So for 1 hour is geometry about construction, and then the next hour you're actually out there building stuff, and they actually build stuff for the school. So we got portables, we got some sheds, we got some pretty cool stuff, and they're still doing it, and the buildings are bigger and bigger and bigger. They made like this trailer that was really cool.
Yeah. My son helped on some of that, and they actually some of these kids actually thrive in that type of environment versus being stuck in a classroom all day.
They're hands-on.
I was not a classroom person. I can open a book, I could read it, I could know it, I could go to take the test and fail every time. I was not good in the classroom. Give it to me to do, I'll figure it out, and I'll figure it out pretty quick.
We also had automotive stuff, and they actually brought in random cars off the street, off from random people. They backed it up, and they actually fixed it right there. So they had an automotive class, they had a welding class. So all these things, I know my high school offered it. So it's not, you know, they're not offering it anymore. Maybe some high schools around America don't, but I feel like there's going to be a wave of them actually offering this opportunity.
Well, we are out of time for today here on Northwest Digital News. We don't even have an opportunity to go to any local stuff because we are actually completely out of time. But I want to address just one thing very quickly. Time. I had an individual yesterday who asked me the question, is it your job to tell people that there's a problem with the education system and whatnot? Well, I would.
Somebody said that to you?
Somebody actually asked me, is it my job to tell people, because we put this post up with regard to the universities. And I would say to this, it wasn't my job to enlist for the United States Army. I regarded it as a duty and a way that I could serve my citizens. When I have put up various content on the web that I have over the years and now have just under 50 million unique viewers of content in 220 countries and territories around the world. I've made it my civic duty to help people understand issues from a grander scope.
25K.
Yeah.
And so, let me guess. So this person, it's only okay for certain people to educate others on things? I mean, because we do personal service announcements all the time.
All the time.
And if we aren't supposed to be doing those, I guess I didn't get the memo.
Yeah. But, so it was a very uninformed comment.
I'll have to read. I haven't.
You'll have to go check it out.
I don't know what's
but
going on.
So no, it's not our job. It's our civic duty and sense of responsibility in which we help you understand more of what's going on out there in the community, and we'll do that to the very end. My last breath. I'll be doing that my entire life, helping people understand issues more clearly and concisely. So we are done here on Northwest Digital News. I'm Kevin Hunter with Chris Bornstead, Kyle Torgeson. Till next time, take care.